Angelica Reyes learned early that the safest way to survive was to take up as little space as possible. You didn't argue with men who wore confidence like armor. You didn't challenge people who spoke in commands instead of sentences. You didn't draw attention to yourself when the world had already decided you were replaceable. So she wiped the counter again. Not because it was dirty, because motion without noise made her invisible. The diner sat on the edge of the river, a narrow strip of fluorescent light wedged between an auto body shop and a closed laundromat. Rain pressed against the windows like it wanted inside. The kind of rain that didn't fall. It lingered, heavy, patient. Watching Angelica's shift had started at 4 in the afternoon. It was past 2 in the morning now. Her feet ached, her back burned. Her phone, tucked into her apron pocket, buzzed with another reminder she couldn't afford to answer. Final notice. She didn't check it. She never did. The bell above the door hadn't rung in over 20 minutes, which meant only one thing. The men in the corner booth were still there. They'd arrived quietly. No shouting, no swagger. Just 4 men in tailored coats, shoes polished to a dull shine, eyes moving constantly even while their bodies remained still. 3 of them were obvious. Built thick, shoulders tight under expensive fabric. The kind of men who didn't sit unless they had already measured the room. The 4th didn't need to do anything at all. Thomas Calderone sat with his back to the wall, one hand resting on the table, the other loose at his side. He wasn't large, not compared to the men flanking him, but the space around him felt compressed, like the air had been warned. Angelica had never spoken to him before. She'd never needed to. Everyone in this part of the city knew his name without being taught. It moved through neighborhoods the way weather did. You didn't argue with storms. You prepared for them, or you got out of the way. She poured coffee at the counter, listening to the hiss of the machine, the clink of ceramic, the distant rumble of traffic on wet pavement. Miss? The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Angelica turned. One of the men stood halfway from the booth, his hand lifted just enough to signal her. Scar at his jaw, eyes sharp, impatient. Refill, he said. She nodded and moved. Rule number 1. Don't linger. She approached the table with the pot balanced easily in her hand. Years of muscle memory kept her steady even when her pulse kicked up a notch. Thomas Calderone didn't look at her face. He looked at her hands. That unsettled her more than a stare would have. She poured. Black coffee, no sugar, exactly as before. She turned to leave. You're observant, Thomas said. She stopped. Not because she wanted to, but because her body reacted before her mind caught up. I try to do my job, Angelica replied quietly. A pause. Not an interruption, a consideration. Thomas lifted his gaze. His eyes were a calm gray, unreadable, like a lake that never reflected the sky. He studied her without expression, as if committing details to memory he might never need again. What's your name? He asked. Angelica hesitated just long enough to be honest. Angelica. He nodded once. Thank you, Angelica. That was it. No threat, no promise, no tone she could label. She returned to the counter, heart beating faster than it should have. Behind the glass, rain distorted the parking lot into streaks of light and shadow. The black sedan sat under the only working street lamp, sleek and anonymous. She'd seen it arrive. She'd watched one of the guards circle it out of habit. But now something was wrong. Not obvious, not dramatic. Wrong in the way silence sometimes was. Angelica leaned forward slightly, pretending to reach for napkins. Her eyes caught movement low to the ground. Too quick, too deliberate. A man in a gray jacket straightened from beneath the rear of the car. He didn't look around. He walked away fast. Angelica's chest tightened. Her father's voice rose uninvited from memory, rough and patient from years ago, when he'd still been able to explain things instead of pointing at them. You don't touch a car like that unless you're planning to leave it forever. She gripped the counter. Not your business, she told herself. Not your world. The men stood. Money hit the table. Clean. Excessive. Thomas adjusted his coat. Angelica watched them step outside, rain immediately soaking dark fabric, shoes splashing against pavement. The driver reached for the handle. Thomas followed. Something inside Angelica broke its leash. She didn't think. She moved. The counter scraped as she vaulted it. A mug shattered. Someone cursed. Cold rain slapped her face as she burst through the door. "Don't get in the car!" Time collapsed. 3 weapons appeared like reflexes given form. Metal. Precision. Red dots bloomed across her chest, her shoulder, her throat. Angelica froze, hands lifted instinctively, breath tearing at her lungs. The guards were shouting. The rain was screaming. But Thomas Calderone hadn't moved. His hand hovered inches from the door handle. He turned slowly, deliberately, as if nothing else existed. "Explain," he said. Not a command, an invitation. Angelica swallowed. "I saw someone," she said, voice shaking but loud enough. "Under the car." Rear axle. He wasn't fixing anything. One of the guards scoffed, finger tightening on the trigger. Thomas lifted one finger. The guard stopped. "Check," Thomas said. No anger, no doubt, just certainty. The man crouched, flashlight slicing through rain and shadow. Seconds stretched thin. Then, boss. The word cracked. There's wiring. Silence fell heavier than the storm. Thomas lowered his hand from the door. He turned back to Angelica, not with gratitude, with interest sharp enough to cut. "What you just did," he said quietly, stepping closer, "means you no longer belong to your old life." Angelica's legs trembled. "I don't want anything," she said. "I just couldn't stay quiet." Thomas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Get in the car," he told his men. And to Angelica, "Softer, not that one." They didn't put Angelica in the car. That was the first thing she noticed. The black sedan, sleek, armored, now surrounded by men speaking urgently into their cuffs, was pushed back from the curb as if it were already a corpse. A second vehicle rolled in from the alley instead, dark and unmarked, its engine low and steady. Thomas Calderone didn't touch her. He didn't grab her arm or shove her forward. He didn't have to. "Walk," he said, calm as ever. Angelica walked. Her legs felt disconnected from the rest of her body, like they belonged to someone braver, someone who hadn't just had 3 guns pointed at her heart. Rain soaked her hair, flattened her uniform against her skin. She could feel eyes on her from inside the diner. Truckers, students, people who would tell this story wrong for years. The van door opened. She climbed in. Only when it closed behind her did her hands start shaking. The inside was nothing like she expected. No cages, no chains, no smell of oil or sweat. Instead, soft lighting. Leather seats, screens mounted along the walls showing live feeds of streets, traffic cams, rooftops, a moving nerve center. Thomas sat across from her, coat removed, sleeves rolled once at the wrist. One of his men handed him a tablet. Another spoke quietly into a headset. Angelica pressed herself into the corner of the seat, hands clasped between her knees. "Like an apology." "You can relax," Thomas said. She let out a short, almost hysterical laugh. "That's generous advice." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said. Angelica inhaled slowly. She forced her voice steady. He wasn't there long, but he knew where to kneel, near the rear axle. Fuel line side. "That's not random." "Why do you know that?" Thomas asked. She hesitated. "My father," she said. "He worked maintenance, heavy equipment. He taught me things. Not the whole truth." "Enough." Thomas nodded, accepting the answer without pushing. That surprised her more than anything else. The van moved. Outside, Chicago slid past in blurred streaks of light and shadow. Inside, the air felt heavier, waiting. A man's voice cut through the quiet from one of the screens. "Device confirmed." Pressure triggered. If the door had been opened. Thomas raised a hand. I know, he said. He looked back at Angelica. You saved my life. She swallowed. I didn't plan to. That makes it more valuable, he replied. The words settled between them, unsettling in their weight. Angelica shifted. Am I going home? Thomas didn't answer immediately. The van took a turn too smooth to be normal. No, he said at last. Not yet. Her heart sank. I don't want money, she said quickly. Or favors. I just want to go back to work. I have another shift tomorrow. Thomas studied her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. You don't understand, he said. The moment you ran into the rain, you stopped being invisible. That wasn't the plan, Angelica shot back, then winced. Sorry. This isn't my world. No, Thomas agreed. It's not. The van slowed. They stopped in a private underground garage, concrete echoing softly as the engine cut. The doors opened to reveal a sleek elevator already waiting. Angelica didn't move. Thomas noticed. You're afraid I'll lock you in a room, he said. Yes, she answered honestly. He nodded once. Fair. He stepped out first, then turned back to her. You will stay somewhere safe tonight, he continued. You will be fed. You will sleep. In the morning, you can decide what you want. What if I decide I want to leave? Angelica asked. Then you'll leave, Thomas said. No hesitation, no condition. The elevator doors slid shut behind them. They rose in silence. The place he took her to wasn't a warehouse or a fortress. It was an apartment overlooking the river, all glass and muted colors, quiet in a way that felt expensive. Security was present but discreet, men positioned like furniture meant to blend into the walls. Angelica stood in the center of the living room, arms wrapped around herself. This feels like a cage, she said. Thomas removed his watch, set it on the counter. It's a shelter, he corrected. There's a difference. For you, she said. Not for me. He turned to face her fully. You interrupted something tonight, he said. Something meant to end me. Whoever arranged it now knows two things. She waited. One, I'm still alive. And two? She asked. Thomas's gaze held hers. That you exist. The weight of it pressed down on her chest. I didn't ask for that, she whispered. No, he said softly. But you chose it. Silence stretched. Finally, Angelica straightened. Then I choose something else now, she said. I stay tonight, but I won't be used. I won't lie, and I won't help anyone hurt someone else. Thomas studied her as if reassessing an equation. Then, to her shock, he inclined his head. Agreed. The word echoed louder than any threat. He gestured toward a hallway. There's a room. Shower. Clean clothes. As she walked away, she felt his eyes on her. Not possessive, not hungry. Evaluating, noticing. And for the first time since she'd shouted into the rain, Angelica understood the real danger wasn't the bomb. It was that Thomas Calderone was listening. Angelica didn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river, its surface black and restless under the city lights. Somewhere far below, traffic murmured like a distant tide. The silence inside the apartment pressed harder than the noise ever had. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a borrowed sweater that smelled faintly of detergent and something clean she couldn't name. Her waitress uniform hung folded on a chair, damp but intact. Proof that the night had been real. Her phone buzzed again. She checked it this time. A voicemail. Her mother's hospice nurse. Routine update. Nothing urgent. Everything heavy. Angelica pressed her thumb to her forehead and breathed. I should be there, she thought. I should be anywhere else. A soft knock came at the door. She stiffened. Yes? It opened slowly. A woman stood there, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing a simple black suit. Not a guard, not a servant. I'm Elena, the woman said. I handle logistics. Angelica nodded cautiously. There's food in the kitchen, Elena continued. You don't have to eat with anyone. And, she hesitated, Mr. Calderone asked me to tell you that you're free to leave the apartment at any time. The doors will open for you. Angelica blinked. Just walk out? And no one stops me? Elena met her gaze. No one. Angelica searched her face for deception. Found none? Why? Angelica asked. Elena considered her. Because you asked for choice. Angelica sat there for a long time after the door closed. Choice. She hadn't realized how rarely anyone offered it without strings. Morning arrived slowly, gray light creeping across the apartment, like it didn't want to intrude. Angelica showered, dressed in jeans and a plain shirt, left neatly on the bed. The clothes fit too well to be random. She stepped into the kitchen. Thomas Calderone stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, hands steady as he poured coffee. No jacket, no visible weapon, just a man who hadn't slept either. You're up, he said. So are you, she replied. He slid a mug across the counter toward her without asking how she took it. Black, no sugar, she noticed. They drank in silence for a moment. I reviewed the security footage again, Thomas said finally. From the diner, the street, nearby cameras. And? Angelica asked. And whoever planted the device knew my schedule, he said. Knew which car I'd take. Knew I wouldn't change it. That narrows it down, she said. It does, he agreed. To people I already trust. Angelica looked at him. Really looked. For the first time, the calm around him cracked just enough for her to see the tension underneath. Not fear. Betrayal. You think it was someone close, she said. I know it was, Thomas replied. She hesitated, then spoke anyway. Then why am I here? He met her gaze without flinching. Because you're not, she frowned. Not close, he clarified. Not invested. Not afraid of losing position or favor. You saw something and acted without calculating the outcome. That almost got me killed, she said. Yes, Thomas said. And it also saved me. He leaned back against the counter. I need someone who doesn't belong to this world to tell me what's wrong with it. Angelica let out a short breath. You're asking a waitress for strategic insight. I'm asking a woman who spoke when silence was safer, he corrected. Titles don't interest me. She studied him for a long moment. I won't spy, she said. I won't manipulate. And I won't help you hurt someone just because they're inconvenient. Thomas nodded slowly. Good, he said, because those rules eliminate half the people around me. A faint smile touched her mouth, despite herself. Footsteps approached. Elena returned, accompanied by a tall man with graying hair and a scar near his temple. His presence was quieter than the guards, but heavier? This is Marco, Thomas said. He's been with my family longer than I've been alive. Marco inclined his head to Angelica. His eyes were sharp, measuring. We found something, Marco said, addressing Thomas. The explosive components weren't sourced locally. They came through a shell company, one that feeds into our own logistics network. Angelica straightened. So whoever did this used your supply chain. Yes, Marco said, which means they expected us not to look too closely. Angelica's mind clicked into motion before she could stop it. Because auditing your own people would cause panic, she said slowly. And panic destabilizes power. Thomas watched her intently. And destabilized power invites challengers, she continued. So the safest place to hide is inside something everyone's afraid to question. Silence followed. Marco looked at Thomas. She's not wrong, Thomas exhaled. That's what worries me, he said. He turned to Angelica. Walk with me. They moved through the apartment, past glass walls and quiet hallways, until they reached a balcony overlooking the river. Wind tugged at Angelica's hair. People think power is about control, Thomas said. It's not. It's about belief. As long as everyone believes the structure holds, it does. And when belief breaks, Angelica asked. Everything collapses, he replied. She leaned against the railing. Then maybe you shouldn't patch the crack. He glanced at her. Maybe you should show it, she finished. Let the people who benefit from the lie feel the cost of it. Thomas was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "You realize what you're suggesting." "Yes," Angelica said. "You'd lose things." "And you'd gain nothing," he said. She met his eyes. "I'd gain the right to sleep at night." Something shifted in his expression. Not desire, not dominance. Respect. "Stay," he said. "At least until we know who's responsible." She considered. "I stay," she said. "But on my terms." He nodded. "Of course," Thomas said. For the first time since the rain-soaked street, Angelica felt something settle in her chest. Not safety, purpose. And somewhere deep inside the Calderone empire, the people who thought they were invisible began to realize the quiet waitress had already seen them. By the third day, Angelica understood something fundamental about power. It didn't announce itself with raised voices or violence. It hummed quietly through hallways, settled into routines, and dared anyone to interrupt it. She watched from the edges, from the kitchen counter while Thomas spoke in low tones to men who nodded too quickly, from the balcony while Elena coordinated movements that looked mundane but felt rehearsed, from the couch, feet tucked beneath her, listening to conversations that stopped just a fraction of a second too late when she entered the room. No! One forgot she was there. They just didn't know what to do with her. That unsettled them. Thomas had kept his word. No one questioned her presence openly. No one ordered her around. But Angelica felt the weight of their attention like a held breath. "You don't belong," one of the guards muttered once, not quite under his breath. She met his gaze calmly. "Neither do you," she replied. He didn't speak to her again. The reports came in pieces. Financial irregularities buried in routine transfers. Security protocols altered just enough to look like optimization. A pattern emerging that pointed inward, not outward. Angelica didn't push. She listened. She asked questions that sounded naive, but weren't. Why is that warehouse listed twice? Who approved this override? What happens if someone refuses that order? Late that afternoon, Thomas found her in the small study off the main room. She sat at the desk, a legal pad in front of her filled with neat, deliberate handwriting. "You're mapping us," he said. She didn't look up. "I'm mapping the gaps." "That's more dangerous." "Yes." He crossed his arms, watching her. "You could stop." "I could," she agreed. "But then I'd be pretending I didn't see the cracks. That's how people get hurt." Thomas leaned against the doorframe. "You don't talk like someone afraid of consequences." Angelica set the pen down and finally looked at him. "I'm terrified," she said. "I'm just more afraid of what happens if I stay quiet." The words landed harder than any accusation. A phone buzzed. Elena's voice came through from the hallway. "Thomas, we have movement." The tone wasn't urgent. That made it worse. They gathered in the main room, eyes on the screens as feeds flickered into focus. A familiar street appeared. Angelica's neighborhood. Her block. Angelica felt the blood drain from her face. "That's my place," she said. Thomas's posture shifted instantly. Zoom. The camera tightened. A black sedan idled across the street. Engine running. "Lights off." "How long?" he asked. 20 minutes, Elena replied. "No plate swapped once already." Angelica's hands clenched. "They're waiting for me." "Yes," Thomas said. "Or they're sending a message." "To you," she said quietly. "To both of us," he corrected. She stood. "I need to go." Thomas stepped into her path. "No. My mother lives 3 floors down," Angelica said, voice tight. "If they think I'll lead them somewhere." "They won't touch her," Thomas said immediately. "You don't know that," Angelica snapped. "You don't get to be sure." The room went still. Thomas studied her, really studied her, as if weighing something far heavier than logistics. "You're right," he said at last. "I don't." He turned to Elena. Pull a team. Quiet. No weapons visible. Elena hesitated. That breaks protocol. Thomas didn't raise his voice. Do it anyway. She nodded and moved. Angelica stared at him. You're coming with me? That puts you at risk. So does letting you go alone. They rode in silence. The city looked different from inside Thomas Calderone's convoy. Not louder, not richer, just more exposed. Every corner felt like a decision point. They parked a block away from Angelica's building. The sedan was still there. Thomas touched her arm lightly. Stay behind me. She didn't argue. They walked. The sedan's engine cut as they approached. Two men stepped out. Not guards, not soldiers. Observers. There she is, he said. The hero. Thomas stopped. The smile faded. You shouldn't be here, the man continued, eyes never leaving Angelica. You made things complicated. I didn't plan to, Angelica said. Her voice was steady. But you did. The man laughed. You think this is about you? Thomas stepped forward. You've made your point, he said calmly. Leave. The man glanced at him, then back to Angelica. He won't always be around. Angelica met his gaze. Neither will you. Something in her tone made him pause. They left without another word. The sedan disappeared down the street. Angelica exhaled slowly, knees weak. Thomas watched her carefully. You okay? She nodded. They wanted me scared. And? He asked. She straightened. They failed. He studied her, then, unexpectedly, stepped back. A deliberate gesture. Respect. They won't try intimidation again, he said. Not like that. Why? She asked. Because you didn't ask me to fix it, Thomas replied. You faced it. Angelica looked at her building, then back at him. This is bigger than me now, she said. Yes, Thomas agreed, and you're still choosing to stay, she nodded once. Then we do this right, she said. No lies, no scapegoats. And when the truth comes out, it comes out publicly, Thomas finished. A beat. You'll lose control, she warned. He held her gaze. Power that can't survive truth doesn't deserve it, Thomas said. In that moment, Angelica realized something crucial. He wasn't asking her to kneel, he was learning how. The next morning, Angelica asked for a notebook, not a tablet, not a secure phone, just paper. Elena brought it without comment. Angelica sat at the dining table overlooking the river, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, coffee going cold beside her. She drew boxes, arrows, names she'd overheard, departments that didn't officially exist, lines of money that curved where they shouldn't. By noon, Thomas was standing behind her, watching without interrupting. You organize chaos like it's muscle memory, he said. It is, Angelica replied, still writing. I worked 2 jobs through school. If I didn't track everything, something broke. Usually me, he smiled faintly. You're doing it again. She capped the pen and turned to face him. I need to be clear, she said. If I stay involved, it's not as a mascot or a shield. I won't be paraded around as proof you're benevolent. Good, Thomas said. I hate theater. I also won't give you information that leads directly to violence, she continued. If someone needs to be removed, that's your decision, not mine. A pause. Thomas considered her words carefully, like clauses in a contract. And in return? He asked. Angelica met his gaze. Transparency. When you find the traitor, I'm present. I hear everything. No sanitized version. That's dangerous, he said. Yes, she replied. For both of us. Then Thomas did something no one else in the room expected. He pulled out a chair and sat. At her level. Agreed, he said. The word landed like a gavel. From that moment on, the tone changed. Meetings shifted. Conversations slowed. People explained themselves more carefully when Angelica was present. Not because Thomas ordered them to, but because he didn't stop her from asking questions. She noticed who resented it. She noticed who relaxed. Patterns emerged. Someone was siphoning money through legitimate charities, small amounts, often enough to disappear into audits no one wanted to perform. Someone had access to Thomas's movements before they were finalized. Someone with authority, not muscle. Your enemy isn't trying to replace you, Angelica said one evening as they stood by the window. They're trying to become unavoidable. Thomas nodded. Control without visibility. It's patient, she added. And confident. He glanced at her. Like you. She snorted softly. I'm neither. You are, he said simply. You just don't enjoy it. That night, the first real attempt came. Not at her, at the structure. A warehouse inspection went wrong. A fire alarm tripped in one building while power failed in another. Two problems designed to pull attention apart. Angelica saw it immediately. They're testing response time, she said. Mapping reflexes. Thomas's jaw tightened. And our people are following protocol instead of thinking. Because protocol is safer than judgment, she said. Until it isn't. What would you do? Angelica hesitated, then answered honestly. I'd let one small thing fail. The room stilled. On purpose? Elena asked. Yes, Angelica said. You can't catch someone who's never sure they've been seen. Let them get comfortable. Let them think their plan is working. Thomas studied her, weighing risk against instinct. Then he nodded. Do it, he said. The fire was contained. The power outage lingered just long enough to expose rerouted communications. A name surfaced. Not a soldier, not a captain. A trustee. Someone untouchable by reputation alone. Angelica stared at the file when it appeared on the screen. Are you surprised? Thomas asked. No, she said softly. I'm disappointed. He watched her carefully. In me? In systems that reward silence, she replied, even when it rots everything. Thomas leaned back, eyes dark. This will get ugly. Yes, Angelica agreed, but it won't be quiet anymore. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, deliberately, he removed a ring from his finger and placed it on the table between them. Not an offer, not a demand. A symbol. This stays here, he said. Until this is over, I don't lead alone anymore. Angelica didn't touch it. She didn't need to. That was the moment the empire shifted, not because power changed hands, but because it accepted limits. And in the silence that followed, everyone understood something fundamental had happened. The waitress hadn't risen. Power had lowered itself to meet her. The first public crack appeared at noon. It wasn't dramatic. No sirens, no bodies. Just a memo, quiet, procedural, devastating. A routine compliance audit flagged a discrepancy in one of the Calderone family's philanthropic arms. The numbers were small enough to ignore if you wanted to, large enough to matter if you didn't. Angelica didn't celebrate. She watched the reactions instead. Phones rang and stopped ringing. People gathered in pairs and then separated too quickly. Someone laughed too loudly in the hallway. Another avoided her eyes altogether. Thomas stood at the far end of the room, hands folded, listening. Freeze nothing, he said when Elena asked. Let it breathe. You're sure? If they think I'm panicking, he replied, they'll hide. If they think I'm bored, they'll get careless. She nodded. Then we wait. Waiting, Angelica learned, was an act of courage. The trustee, an elegant man, with immaculate suits and a reputation for generosity, requested a private meeting that afternoon. He asked for Thomas alone. Thomas looked at Angelica. You're coming. The trustee smiled too easily when he saw her enter the room. I didn't realize this was necessary. Angelica took a seat without asking permission. Transparency? She said. It's our new policy. The man's eyes flicked to Thomas. Is that so? Thomas didn't answer. The trustee spoke for 20 minutes without saying anything actionable. He spoke of optics, of loyalty, of how unfortunate misunderstandings could ripple outward and harm innocent people. Angelica listened patiently. Then she asked one question. Why did the transfers route through the orphanage account? The trustee paused. Just a fraction of a second. Long enough. That's an administrative error, he said smoothly. The funds were always intended for private security, Angelica finished. Off the books. Untraceable. Thomas leaned forward. Explain. The trustee looked at Angelica now, irritation breaking through the polish. You don't understand how things work. Angelica met his gaze evenly. I understand how they fail. She slid the notebook across the table, pages open to a web of connections drawn by hand, dates, amounts, approvals. You didn't think anyone would look, she continued, because people like me don't usually get invited into rooms like this. Thomas didn't raise his voice. You abused trust. The trustee exhaled slowly. I protected this family. You protected yourself, Angelica said, at the cost of everyone else. Security escorted him out without spectacle. Word spread fast. By evening, 2 more names surfaced. Not conspirators, beneficiaries. People who had known and chosen comfort over consequence. The internal villain wasn't a mastermind. It was a culture. That night, Angelica sat alone on the balcony, legs tucked beneath her, the city humming below. She felt heavy, not victorious. Thomas joined her, carrying 2 glasses of water. He handed her one. You could have walked away, he said. After the diner, after the sedan, after today. Yes, she replied. I could have. Why didn't you? She thought for a long moment. Because every time someone says this is just how it is, someone else pays for it, Angelica said. Usually the people who can't afford to. Thomas watched the river. You make it difficult to be complacent. Good, she said softly. Complacency kills. The retaliation came before dawn. Not bullets. Paper. An injunction filed through a shell law firm. Frozen accounts. Emergency hearings requested by allies who suddenly remembered their ethics. Angelica read the filings with a calm that surprised even her. They're trying to bury you under legitimacy, she said. They want to slow you down until momentum dies. Thomas nodded. They underestimate patience. They underestimate me, she corrected. He looked at her. They do. Angelica stood. We go public. That's war, Thomas said. She met his eyes. Truth always is. He considered her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Prepare it, he said. All of it. As the sun rose, Angelica felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not fear. Resolve. This wasn't about saving a man anymore. It was about breaking a silence that had mistaken itself for order, and it was already too loud to stop. The press didn't arrive with cameras first. They arrived with questions. By mid-morning, Thomas Calderone's name was trending in circles that pretended not to know who he was. Financial journalists, civic watchdogs, legal analysts who spoke in careful hypotheticals while sharpening their knives. Angelica watched the feeds from the conference room, arms folded, jaw set. They're circling, Elena said, waiting for blood. Angelica shook her head. They're waiting for permission. Thomas entered quietly, jacket on, expression unreadable. Give it to them, he said. The room stilled. Elena blinked. Everything? Yes, Thomas replied. The audits, the internal memos, the transfers, the names. Angelica studied him. You'll lose allies. I'll lose parasites, he said. There's a difference. They held the press conference in a neutral space. No Calderone symbols, no opulence. Just a room, a podium, and a man who didn't flinch when the lights came on. Angelica stood off to the side, out of frame by design. Not hidden, positioned. Thomas spoke first. I am responsible for the systems I benefit from, he said. When they fail, I answer for them. The questions came fast, sharp, relentless. Angelica listened for what wasn't being asked. Then she stepped forward. Murmurs rippled. I'm not here as counsel, she said into the microphone, voice steady. I'm here as a witness. The room leaned in. I work nights. I serve food. I clean tables. I wasn't supposed to be in this room, Angelica continued. But I saw something wrong, and silence would have been easier, a reporter scoffed softly. You expect us to believe? I don't expect belief, Angelica interrupted. I expect attention. She laid out the timeline, the device, the intimidation, the paper trail. She spoke plainly, without drama, without accusation. Facts did the work. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Not stunned, awake. The backlash was immediate. Within hours, a restraining order was filed against Angelica. On what grounds? Elena demanded. Harassment, defamation, endangerment, the lawyer replied coolly. Angelica read the document once. They're trying to make me the story, she said. Thomas's jaw tightened. I won't allow. You don't get to shield me from consequences. That defeats the point. He stopped, listened. What do you want to do? He asked. I testify, Angelica said, publicly, under oath. That puts you at risk. Yes, she agreed. But it puts the truth somewhere it can't be buried. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll stand with you, he said. No, Angelica replied gently. You'll stay where you are. Let them see I'm not speaking because you told me to. The hearing was held 2 days later. Angelica wore a simple dress. No armor, no disguise. She spoke for 90 minutes. She didn't raise her voice once. When it ended, the judge dismissed the order. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Angelica answered only one. Why did you do it? She paused. Because power that can't be questioned becomes violence, she said. And silence is how it learns to hide. That night, Thomas waited for her on the balcony. You didn't need me, he said quietly. She met his gaze. I never said I did. A beat. Then he smiled. Not a conquering smile. A humbled one. The villain made their final move at dawn. A document leaked. Doctored, precise, cruel. It framed Angelica as a paid plant, a distraction, a woman used to legitimize a criminal empire's internal purge. It almost worked. Almost. Until the metadata surfaced. Angelica found it herself. They rushed, she said, handing the tablet to Thomas. Fear makes people sloppy. The name behind it wasn't a trustee this time. It was family. Someone who had smiled at her, praised her bravery, promised reform. Thomas closed his eyes when he saw it. When he opened them, something had settled. We end this, he said. How? Angelica asked. By letting the truth take everything it's owed. The final reckoning wouldn't be loud. It would be permanent. The name sat on the screen like a bruise. Not distant, not abstract. Family. Thomas didn't speak for a long time. He stood at the window, hands braced on the railing. City lights breaking against the glass. Angelica watched his reflection instead of his face. She'd learned that sometimes reflections told the truth faster. You don't have to protect me from this, she said quietly. I'm not, he replied. I'm protecting what comes after. He turned. The calm was back, but it had changed. Thinner, sharper, purpose-built. We'll expose it, Thomas said. The leak, the funding, the motive. Angelica nodded. And then? And then the structure collapses, he said. People scatter. Some will try to attach themselves to you. She tilted her head. To me? You're credible, he said. You didn't ask for anything. That makes you dangerous. Angelica laughed softly. I don't want followers. Good, Thomas said. Followers corrupt faster than enemies. They worked through the night. Not in secret, methodically. Every document authenticated. Every call logged. Every claim paired with proof that could stand on its own without his name attached. Angelica insisted on it. If the truth needs a powerful man to carry it, she said, it isn't strong enough. Thomas accepted the condition without argument. By morning, the package was ready. It went out to regulators, journalists, oversight committees simultaneously. No exclusives, no favors, just facts. The response was seismic. Boards convened emergency sessions. Partners distanced themselves in carefully worded statements. The family member at the center of it all issued a denial that unraveled within hours under scrutiny. Angelica watched it unfold with a strange sense of detachment. "This is the part where people expect me to celebrate," she said. Thomas poured coffee. And I feel tired," she admitted. "And sad. And relieved. In that order." He handed her the mug. "That's honest." By evening, the call came. A private line. Secure. They wanted Angelica's cooperation going forward. A formal role. Advisory capacity. Compensation generous enough to feel like a test. Thomas listened without interrupting as she related. "And what do you want?" he asked when she finished. She didn't answer right away. They stood in the quiet apartment, the city outside, loud with consequences. "I want my mother safe," Angelica said finally. "I want to finish paying her medical bills without it feeling like blood money. I want to keep my name." "You'll have all of that," Thomas said. She met his eyes. "And I don't want to belong to you." The words didn't wound him. They grounded him. "I wouldn't accept you if you did," he said. She breathed out, something unclenching. "They'll try to offer me protection," Angelica continued. "And power. And a seat at tables that make decisions." "Yes," Thomas said. "They will." "And if I say yes," she said, "I become something that requires compromise." "Everything does," he replied gently. She considered that. Then she smiled, small but certain. "Then I choose carefully." She accepted the advisory role, with conditions, term limits, public disclosures, independent oversight, the right to walk away without penalty. The offer changed shape to accommodate her. Thomas watched it happen with quiet awe. "They're adjusting," he said. "They have to," Angelica replied. "Or they admit the system was never meant to listen." Later that night, when the city finally seemed to exhale, Thomas stood with her on the balcony. "I could offer you more." He said, "Wealth, permanence, a name beside mine." She looked at him, not startled, not tempted. "Is that what you want?" she asked. He considered the question seriously. "I want you to choose," he said. She smiled. "Then listen carefully," Angelica said. "I don't want to be elevated as proof of your redemption. I don't want romance used as a headline. And I don't want to lose myself trying to stand next to power." Thomas nodded. "What do you want?" he asked again. "I want time," she said. "I want space. I want to see who we are when no one's watching." He stepped back, physically, emotionally. "I'll wait," he said. And for the first time, Angelica believed him. Not because of his word, but because he didn't ask her to prove anything in return. That night, she slept. Not because the danger was gone, but because she had chosen herself without apology, and power had not chased her for it. The city didn't end. It adjusted. Angelica noticed it first in the smallest ways: headlines changing tone, reporters asking different questions, people who once spoke in euphemisms suddenly using plain language. The system hadn't collapsed into ruin. It had cracked, then reassembled around the fracture. That was how power survived truth. By learning, Angelica moved out of the apartment 2 weeks later. Not in secret, not under guard. Just a quiet morning, a borrowed car, and 2 boxes of things she'd accumulated in a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Thomas stood by the door as she zipped her jacket. "You don't have to disappear," he said. "I'm not," Angelica replied. "I'm relocating." "To where?" She smiled. "Somewhere ordinary." He nodded, understanding more than she'd said. Her new place was smaller than the apartment overlooking the river, but it had windows that opened, neighbors who argued about laundry, and a grocery store she could walk to without anyone watching the street. Normal. She visited her mother every afternoon, paid the bills quietly, sat by the bed and talked about things that didn't matter: weather, recipes, people she'd met who would never understand what those conversations cost her. The advisory work came in waves: calls, documents, meetings she attended without fanfare and left without ceremony. She spoke when necessary, She listened more often. They learned quickly not to underestimate silence when it came from her. Thomas kept his distance, not because he wanted to, but because she had asked him to. They spoke occasionally, short messages, updates, no pressure. He kept his word. The family member at the center of the scandal was removed, not violently, not publicly shamed, but permanently sidelined. Legacy stripped clean by records and consequence. Angelica felt no satisfaction in it. Only closure. One evening months later, Thomas asked if he could see her. She agreed. They met in a small cafe halfway between their worlds. No guards in sight. No reserved tables. Just chipped mugs and the low murmur of people living unremarkable lives. Thomas arrived first. He stood when she entered. "You don't have to," she said lightly. "I want to," he replied. They sat. "You look different," he said. "So do you," Angelica replied, less armored. He smiled faintly. "You have a way of doing that to rooms." They talked about work, about her mother, about the city, not about what they were. Finally, Thomas set his cup down. "I need to ask you something," he said. She met his gaze, steady. "Then ask. Are you happy?" The question surprised her. She considered it carefully. "I'm at peace," Angelica said. "Which is rarer?" He nodded, absorbing that. "I don't regret choosing distance," she added. "If that's what you're wondering." "I know," he said. "I just needed to hear it." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. "I'm restructuring," Thomas said finally. "Not cosmetic, real. Slower, smaller, less hidden." Angelica raised an eyebrow. "That will cost you." "Yes," he said. "That's how I know it's working." She smiled. When they stood to leave, Thomas hesitated. "You changed more than my life," he said quietly. "You changed how I understand authority." Angelica slung her bag over her shoulder. "Good. Authority should understand itself better." Outside, the city moved around them, unaware of how close it had come to swallowing its own lies. They parted without ceremony. No kiss, no promise. Just mutual recognition. That night, Angelica walked home alone, keys warm in her hand. The street familiar and unremarkable. She passed a diner. Someone inside wiped a counter. She kept walking, because invisibility, she had learned, was not the same as absence. And power, real power, was choosing when to speak and when to let the world change because you already had. Winter arrived without ceremony. Snow softened the city, blunting its sharpest edges, making everything look quieter than it really was. Angelica liked walking in it. The way footprints appeared and disappeared reminded her that impact didn't have to be permanent to be real. Her mother passed in January, peacefully, in her sleep. No alarms, no urgency. Angelica sat with her long after the nurse confirmed it, holding a hand that had worked too many hours and apologized too often. Grief came in waves, gentle at first, then heavy, then oddly calm. At the funeral, there were no speeches about heroism or sacrifice, just stories about kindness, about a woman who brought soup when no one asked, about a daughter who listened more than she spoke. That suited Angelica fine. Thomas sent flowers, no note. Just white lilies and a card with a single line written in careful ink. "You are not alone." She kept the card. Life resumed, but not as it had been. Angelica's days filled with quiet responsibility. Meetings with oversight boards, calls with regulators who spoke to her cautiously, aware she didn't need their approval. She turned down more offers than she accepted. "I don't want to build a brand," she told one committee. "I want to close gaps. Some understood, some didn't. She worked anyway." The city changed in subtle ways. Shelters received funding without publicity. Contracts were restructured with boring language that saved lives quietly. Audits became less performative and more real. None of it traced back to her directly. That was intentional. One evening, after a long day, Angelica stopped by the diner where she used to work. Not out of nostalgia, out of hunger. The place smelled the same: coffee, oil, familiar exhaustion. A new waitress stood behind the counter, moving quickly, eyes sharp. Angelica ordered a sandwich and waited. Long shift? The girl asked casually. Long life, Angelica replied. The girl laughed, not knowing why. Angelica left a generous tip, not extravagant, just respectful. Outside, she paused under the street lamp. The same one. The memory rose unbidden. Rain, fear, a choice made without permission. She didn't regret it. Months later, Thomas called. "May I ask you for something?" he said. "You can ask," Angelica replied. "That's not the same as getting." He smiled into the phone. She could hear it. "I'm forming an independent review council," he said. "External, teeth included. I want you to help choose who sits on it." Angelica considered. "That puts me adjacent to you again," she said. "Yes," Thomas replied, "which is why I want your conditions." She exhaled slowly. "Then listen carefully," she said. "No immunity, no private veto, and if they come for you, I don't intervene." A pause. "Agreed," Thomas said. She hung up feeling steady, not triumphant. Steady. They met one last time that year, not privately. At a public forum where reforms were discussed without drama, they nodded to each other across the room like equals. No one noticed. That was the point. Angelica returned home late that night, snow crunching beneath her boots. She unlocked her door, set her bag down, and stood in the quiet. Her life wasn't easier, but it was hers. The city changed in subtle ways. Shelters received funding without publicity. Contracts were restructured with boring language that saved lives quietly. Audits became less performative and more real. None of it traced back to her directly. That was intentional. One evening, after a long day, Angelica stopped by the diner where she used to work. Not out of nostalgia, out of hunger. The place smelled the same: coffee, oil, familiar exhaustion. A new waitress stood behind the counter, moving quickly, eyes sharp. Angelica ordered a sandwich and waited. Long shift? The girl asked casually. Long life, Angelica replied. The girl laughed, not knowing why. Angelica left a generous tip, not extravagant, just respectful. Outside, she paused under the street lamp. The same one. The memory rose unbidden. Rain, fear, a choice made without permission. She didn't regret it. Months later, Thomas called. "May I ask you for something?" he said. "You can ask," Angelica replied. "That's not the same as getting." He smiled into the phone. She could hear it. "I'm forming an independent review council," he said. "External, teeth included. I want you to help choose who sits on it." Angelica considered. "That puts me adjacent to you again," she said. "Yes," Thomas replied, "which is why I want your conditions." She exhaled slowly. "Then listen carefully," she said. "No immunity, no private veto, and if they come for you, I don't intervene." A pause. "Agreed," Thomas said. She hung up feeling steady, not triumphant. Steady. They met one last time that year, not privately. At a public forum where reforms were discussed without drama, they nodded to each other across the room like equals. No one noticed. That was the point. Angelica returned home late that night, snow crunching beneath her boots. She unlocked her door, set her bag down, and stood in the quiet. Her life wasn't easier, but it was hers. She brewed tea, sat by the window, watched the city breathe. Power hadn't crowned her. It had stepped aside, and in that space, Angelica Reyes lived, without spectacle, without apology, without silence, mistaken for weakness. The invitation arrived without ceremony. No embossed seal, no courier, just an email with a subject line that read, "Public Hearing, Oversight Committee Formation." Angelica read it once, then again, then closed her laptop. She didn't feel a rush or dread. She felt ready. The hearing was held in a municipal building that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. Rows of chairs filled with people who believed they understood how systems worked because they'd studied them from a distance. Angelica took her seat at the witness table, hands folded, posture relaxed, not defiant. Grounded. The chair of the committee cleared her throat. "Miss Reyes, you're not here under subpoena." "I know," Angelica said. "You could have declined." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Angelica met her gaze calmly. "Because declining doesn't stop the system from existing. It just guarantees someone else shapes it." A murmur rippled through the room. The questions came methodically, about conflicts of interest, about power adjacency, about whether a person without formal authority could truly remain independent. Angelica answered without ornament. "I don't pretend neutrality," she said. "I practice accountability. If I'm wrong, I expect to be corrected. Publicly." A man near the back scoffed. "You think transparency alone fixes corruption?" "No," Angelica replied evenly. "I think secrecy makes it inevitable." The room stilled. She spoke for over an hour. Not once did she mention Thomas by name. Not once did she frame herself as exceptional. She spoke about structures, incentives, what silence cost the people least equipped to pay for it. When it ended, the committee recessed. Angelica stepped outside into cold air and waited. She didn't pace. She didn't rehearse. She breathed. When they called her back in, the decision was already made. They offered her the position, not as a figurehead, not as a symbol, but as a voting member with the authority to question, audit, and recommend action without interference. She accepted, with amendments. She asked for term limits, independent review, rotating leadership. The chair raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating away influence." Angelica smiled faintly. "I'm preventing dependence." That night, Thomas watched the coverage alone. He didn't call her. He didn't need to. He recognized the moment for what it was. Not a transfer of power, but a release of it. Weeks passed. Angelica settled into the role with quiet efficiency. She learned who spoke to be heard and who spoke to hide. She listened for patterns, not personalities. When she disagreed, she said so plainly. When she didn't know, she admitted it. People learned quickly that posturing didn't work on her. Neither did flattery. One afternoon, a junior analyst pulled her aside. "I don't understand," he said, frustrated. "You could have more. Influence. Control." Angelica considered him. "Why would I want control?" she asked gently. "Over people who don't choose me?" He didn't have an answer. That was okay. Thomas's reforms continued without fanfare. Smaller operations, cleaner lines, less spectacle. The city didn't celebrate it, but it noticed when things stopped breaking. They crossed paths once more that spring. A charity event, neutral ground, cameras everywhere. They spoke briefly, cordially. When a reporter asked if they were aligned, Angelica answered before Thomas could. "We're accountable," she said. "Alignment implies sameness. We're not the same." Thomas nodded. The reporter looked confused. "Good." Later that night, Angelica walked home alone. The air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. She passed the river, lights trembling on its surface. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who wiped counters to stay invisible, the one who'd believed survival meant silence. She hadn't become powerful, she'd become audible, and that was enough. At home, she wrote one line in a notebook she kept for no one else. "Power kneels to truth when truth refuses to kneel." She closed it. Tomorrow would come. It always did. Spring arrived the way it always did, unevenly. One day the river still wore winter's gray skin. The next, green pushed through cracks in the concrete as if it had always been there, waiting for permission. Angelica walked the city more now, not for errands, for listening. She noticed how people stood differently when they spoke at community meetings, how questions came faster when someone realized they wouldn't be punished for asking them, how silence, once broken, never returned in quite the same way. Her role settled into something unglamorous and exacting. Paperwork, testimony, long meetings that ended without applause. She liked it that way. One afternoon, after a particularly long session, Angelica stepped outside and sat on the courthouse steps. She removed her shoes, toes aching, and let the sun warm her face. Around her, people hurried past, carrying lives that didn't know her name. That mattered. A woman sat beside her, mid-30s, tired eyes, nervous hands. "You're Angelica Reyes," the woman said, not quite a question. Angelica nodded. "Yes." The woman swallowed. "I work nights. Cleaning offices. I saw something wrong last week. I didn't know what to do." Angelica turned fully toward her. "What did you do?" she asked. The woman hesitated. I spoke up. Angelica smiled, not wide, not triumphant, just real. "Then you already did the hardest part," she said. They talked for a while, about procedures, about protections, about fear. When the woman left, she walked straighter. Angelica stayed where she was, letting the moment settle. That evening, Thomas called. Not for work, not for strategy. For dinner, he said, if you want. She considered. "I want." They met somewhere unremarkable. A neighborhood restaurant with mismatched chairs and handwritten specials. No private rooms. No watchers. Just two people sharing a meal. They spoke slowly. Carefully. Not because they were afraid, but because they respected the space between words. "I don't need you to save me," Thomas said at one point. Angelica nodded. "Good. I don't need you to fix what I broke," he continued. "I wouldn't," she said. He smiled, something like relief softening his face. "I want to walk alongside you," he said, "if you choose it." Angelica set her fork down. "This is me choosing carefully," she said. "Not loudly, not forever, just honestly." He accepted that. That, too, mattered. They walked after dinner. Not close enough to touch. Not far enough to pretend they were strangers. At the river, they stopped. "This city didn't change because of me," Angelica said quietly. "It changed because it was ready to hear something it had ignored." Thomas looked out at the water. "And because you refused to stay quiet." She shook her head. "I refused to stay silent when silence would have made me complicit." A pause. "That's different." He nodded. They parted at the corner without ceremony. No promises, no fear. Just understanding. Later that night, Angelica stood in her apartment, lights off, window open to the sound of the city breathing. She thought of the diner. The moment her voice had carried further than she ever expected. She hadn't become untouchable. She hadn't become rich beyond measure or powerful beyond consequence. She had become something rarer, a person who chose when to speak, chose when to listen, chose not to trade her conscience for comfort. Power had bowed, not to her, but to the truth she refused to abandon. Angelica turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle. Tomorrow, there would be more work, more questions, more moments when speaking would cost something. She would meet them the same way she always had, standing upright, eyes open, voice steady, because silence is often mistaken for weakness. But choice is the ultimate power, and she would never give it away again. If you saw something wrong, something dangerous, something unjust, and no one expected you to speak, would you? Angelica did. And in doing so, she proved that the most disruptive force in any system isn't violence or ambition. It's an ordinary person who decides that staying quiet would be immoral. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. If this story stayed with you, if Angelica's choice made you pause and think, then stay here with me. Subscribe for more cinematic stories where quiet people change powerful worlds. One brave decision at a time.